Chapter 12. Thinking of that farcical interview, he wondered how long it would be till the next attempt. He still believed that so long as he kept lying low, nothing harmful could happen. Oddly enough, at the end of the month, his usual check arrived, although, for the time being, the university had ceased to exist, at least on the outside. Behind the scenes, there was an endless sequence of sessions, a turmoil of administrative activity, a regrouping of forces, but he declined either to attend these meetings or to receive the various delegations and special messengers that Azurius and Alexander kept sending to his house. He argued that when the Council of Elders had exhausted its power of seduction, he would be left alone, since the government, while not daring to arrest him and being reluctant to grant him the luxury of exile, would still keep hoping with forlorn obstinacy that finally he might relent. The drab color of the future matched well the gray world of his widowhood, and had there been no friends to worry about and no child to hold against his cheek and heart, he might have devoted the twilight to some quiet research. For example, he had always wished to know more about the Aurignacian age, and those portraits of singular beings which perhaps Neanderthal half-men, direct ancestors of Paducah and his likes, used by Aurignacians as slaves, that a Spanish nobleman and a little daughter had discovered in the painted cave of Altamira. Or he might take up some dim problem of Victorian telepathy, the cases reported by clergymen, nervous ladies, retired colonels who had seen service in India, such as the remarkable dream of Miss Story had of her brother's death. And in our turn we shall follow the brother as he walks along the railway line on a very dark night. Having gone 16 miles, he felt a little tired, as who would not. He sat down to take off his boots and dozed off to the chirp of crickets, and then a train lumbered by, 76 ship traps, and a curious Count Sheep sleep parody passed without touching him, and then some projection came in contact with the back of his head, killing him instantly. And we might also probe the illusion's hypnagogics, only illusion of dear Miss Bitter, who had once had a nightmare from which a most distinct demon survived after she woke. She sat up to inspect its hand with clutching the bed rail. It faced into the ornaments over the mantelpiece. Silly, but I can't help it, he thought as he got out of his armchair and crossed the room to rearrange the leering folds of his brown dressing-gown, which, as it sprawled across the divan, showed at one end a very distinct medieval face. He looked up various odds and ends he had stored at odd moments for an essay which he had never written, and would never write, because by now he had forgotten its leading idea, its secret combination. This it was, for instance, the papyrus a person called Rind bought for some Arabs who said they had found it among the ruins of some buildings near Ramsum. It began with the promise to disclose all the secrets, all the mysteries, but like Miss Bitter's demon, turned out to be merely a schoolbook with blank spaces, which some unknown Egyptian farmer in the 17th century BC had used for his clumsy calculations. A newspaper clipping mentioned that the state entomologist had retired to become advisor on shade trees, and one wondered whether this was not some dainty oriental euphemism for death. On the next slip of paper he had transcribed passages from a famous American poem. A curious sight, these bashful bears, these timid warrior whalemen. And now the time of tide has come, the ship casts off her cables. It is not shown on any map, true places never are. This lovely light, it lights not me, all loveliness is anguish. And of course that bit about the delicious death of an Ohio honey hunter. For my humor's sake, I shall preserve the style in which I once narrated it at Tula to a lounging circle of my Russian friends. Truganini, the last Tasmanian, died in 1877, but the last Kruganani could not remember how this was linked up with the fact that the edible Galilean fishes in the 1st century AD would be principally chromids and barbels, through the Raphael's representation of the miraculous drought we find among nondescript piscine forms of young painter's fancy, two specimens which obviously belonged to the skate family, never found in fresh water. Speaking of Roman Venetians shows with wild beasts of the same epoch, we note the stage on which ridiculously picturesque rocks, the later ornamentations of romantic landscapes, and an indifferent forest we represented was made to rise out of the crypts below the urine-soaked arena, with Orpheus on it among real lions and bears with gilded claws, but this Orpheus was acted by a criminal, and the scene ended with a bear killing him, while Titus or Nero or Perdue looked on with that complete pleasure which art shot through with human interest is said to produce. The nearest star is Alpha Centauri. The sun is about 93 million miles away. Our solar system emerged from a spiral nebula. De Sitter, a man of leisure, had estimated the circumference of finite through boundless universe at about 100 million light years, and its mass at about 1 quintillion quadrillions of grams. We can easily imagine people in 3000 AD sneering at our naive nonsense and replacing it by some nonsense of their own. Civil wars destroying Rome, which none could ruin, not even the wild beast Germany with its blue-eyed youth. How I envied Crookins, who had actually seen the Vladimir MSS of horrors destroyed in 1556 when the Benedictine Abbey of St. Peter at Blankenberg, near Ghent, was sacked by the mob. Oh, was it like traveling along the Appian Way in that large four-wheeled coach for long journeys known as the Reda? Same painted ladies spreading their wings on the same thistle-heads. Lives that I envy. Longevity, peaceful times, peaceful country, quiet fame, quiet satisfaction. Ivar Eisen, Norwegian philologist, 1813 to 1896, who invented a language. Down here we have too much of Homo civis and too little of sapiens. Dr. Livingstone mentions that on one occasion, after talking to a bushman for some time about the deity, he found that the savage thought he was speaking of Sakomi, a local chief. The ant lives in a universe shaped of odors, a chemical configurations, old Zoroastrian motif of the rising sun, origin of Persian OG design, the blood and gold horrors of Mexican sacrifices as told by Catholic priests for the 18,000 Formosan boys under 9, whose little hearts were burned out upon altar at the command of the spurious prophet Salmanazar, the whole thing being a European forgery of the pale green 18th century. He tossed the notes back into the drawer of his desk. They were dead and unusable. Leaning his elbow on the desk and swaying slightly in his armchair, he slowly scratched his scalp through the coarse hair as coarse as that of Balzac. He had a note of that too somewhere. A dismal feeling grew upon him. He was empty. He would never write another book. He was too old to bend and rebuild the world which had crashed when she died. He yawned and wondered what individual vertebrate had yawned first, and whether one might suppose that this dull spasm was the first sign of exhaustion on the part of the whole subdivision and its evolutional aspect. Perhaps if I had a new fountain pen instead of this wreck, or a fresh bouquet of, say, 20 beautifully sharpened pencils, and a slim vase and a ream of ivory smooth paper instead of these, 13, 14 more or less rumpled sheets, with a two-eyed dolichocephalic profile drawn by David upon the top one, I might start writing the unknown thing I want to write, unknown except for a vague shoe-shaped outline, the infusorial quiver of which I feel in my restless bones, a feeling of Chicoteky, as we used to say in our childhood, half tingle, half tickle, when you are trying to remember something or understand it something or find something. Probably your bladder is full or your nerves are on edge, but the combination is on the whole not unpleasant if it protracted, and produces a minor orgasm or petit étonnement intérieur, and when at last you find the picture puzzle piece which exactly fixed the gap. As he completed his yawn, he reflected that his body was much too big and healthy for him. Had he been all shriveled up and flaccid and pestered by petty diseases, he might have been more at peace with himself, Baron Munchausen's horse decorporation story. But the individual atom is free. It pulsates as it wants. It's in lower or higher gear. It decides itself when to absorb and when to radiate energy. There is something to be said for the method employed by male characters in old novels. It is indeed soothing to press one's brow to the deliciously cold window pane. So I stood, poor percipient. The morning was gray, with patches of thawing snow. David would have to be fetched from the kindergarten in a few minutes, if his watch was right. The slow, languid sounds and half-hearted thumps coming from the next room meant that Mariette was engaged in expressing her vague notions of order. He heard the sloppy tread of her old bed slippers, trimmed with dirty fur. She had an irritating way of performing her household duties with nothing on, to conceal her miserably young body, save a dim nightgown, the frayed hem of which hardly reached her knees. Finim lucet per bomicina corpus. Lovely ankles. She had the one a prize for dancing, she said. A lie, I guess, like most of her utterances, though on second thoughts she did have in her room a Spanish fan and a pair of castanets. For no special reason, or was he looking for something? No. He had been led to peep into her room in passing while she was out with David. It smelt strongly of her hair and of Saint-Glot, a cheap, musky perfume. Flimsy, soiled odds and ends lay on the floor of the bed table, occupied by a brownish-pink rose in a glass and a large X-ray picture of her lungs on a vertebrae. She had proved such an execrable cook that he had forced to have at least one square meal a day brought for all three from a good restaurant round the corner, while relying on eggs and gruels and various preserves to provide breakfasts and suppers. Having glanced at his watch again and even listened to it, he decided to take his restlessness out for a walk. He found Cinderella in David's bedroom. She had interrupted her labors to pick up one of David's animal books and was now engrossed in it, half sitting, half lying athwart the bed, with one leg stretched far out, the bare ankle resting on the back of a chair, the slipper off the toes moving. "I shall fetch David myself," he said, averting his eyes from the brownish-pink shadows she showed. "What?" The queer child did not trouble to change her attitude, she merely stopped twitching her toes and lifted her lustreless eyes. He repeated the sentence. "Oh, all right," she said, her eyes back on the book. "And do please dress," Krug added before leaving the room. "Ought to get somebody else," he thought, as he walked down the street, somebody totally different, an elderly person, completely clothed. It was, he had understood, merely a matter of habit, the result of having constantly posed naked for the black-bearded artist in apartment 30. In fact, during summer, none of them, she said, wore anything at all indoors. Neither he nor she, nor the artist's wife, who, according to sundry oils exhibited before the Revolution, had a grand body with numerous navels, some frowning, others looking surprised. The kindergarten was a bright little institution run by one of his former students, a woman called Clara Zarkowski, and her brother Miron. The main enjoyment of the 8 little children in their care was provided by an intricate set of padded tunnels just high enough to let one crawl through on 4 floors. But there were also brilliantly painted cardboard bricks and mechanical trains and picture books and a live shaggy dog called Basso. The place had been found by Olga the year before, and David was getting a little too big for it, though he still loved to crawl through the tunnels. In order to avoid exchanging salutations with the other parents, Krug stopped at the gate beyond which was the little garden, now mostly consisting of puddles, with benches for visitors. David was the first to run out of the gaily colored wooden house. "Why didn't Mariette come? Instead of me? Put on your cap. You and she could have come together. Didn't you have any rubbers?" "Uh-huh." "Then give me your hand, and if you walk into a puddle but once, and if I do it by chance?" "Netiano?" "I shall see to that. Come, Raduga Moya, my rainbow. Give me your hand and let us be moving. Billy brought a bone today. Gee whiz, some bone. I want to bring one too." "Is it the dark Billy or the little fellow with the glasses?" "The glasses. He said my mother was dead. Look, a woman, chimney sweep." These had recently appeared owing to some obscure shift or drift in the economies of the state, and much to the delight of children, Krug was silent. David went on talking. "That was your fault, not mine. My left shoe is full of water." "Daddy!" "Yes." "My left shoe is full of water." "Yes, I'm sorry. Let's walk a little faster. What did you answer?" "When?" "When Billy said that stupid thing about your mother." "Nothing. What should I have said?" "But you knew it was a stupid remark." "I guess so. Because even if she were dead, she would not be dead for you or me." "Yes, but she isn't, is she?" "Not in our sense. A bone is nothing to you or me, but it means a lot to Basso." Daddy, he growled over it. He just lay there and growled with his paw on it. Miss Z said we must not touch him or talk to him while he had it. Raduca Moya. There were now in Paragon Lane a bearded man whom Krug knew to be a spy and who always appeared punctually at noon, was at his post before Krug's home. Sometimes he hawked apples. Once he had come disguised as a postman. On very cold days he would try standing in the window as a tailor mimicking a dummy, and Krug had amused himself by outstaring the poor chap. Today he was inspecting the house fronts and jotting down something on a pad. "Counting raindrops, Inspector?" The man looked away, moved, and in moving stubbed his toe against the curb. Krug smiled. "Yesterday," said David, as we were going by, "that man winked at Mariette." Krug smiled again. "You know what, Daddy? I think she talks to him on the telephone. She talks on the telephone every time you go out." Krug laughed. That queer little girl, he imagined, enjoyed the love-making of quite a number of swains. She had 2 afternoons off, probably full of fawns and footballers and matadors. Is this getting to be an obsession? Who is she, a servant, an adopted child, or what? Nothing. I know perfectly well, thought Krug as he stopped laughing, that she merely goes to the pictures with a stumpy girlfriend, so she says, and I've no reason to disbelieve her, and if I really did think she was what she certainly is, I should have fired her instantly because of the germs she might bring into the nursery, just as Olga would have done. Sometimes during the last month the elevator had been removed bodily. Men had come, sealed the door of the unfortunate Baron's tiny house, and carried it into a van intact. The bird inside was too terrified to flutter, or had been a spy, too. It's all right, don't ring, I have this key. Mariette, shouted David. I suppose she is out shopping, said Krug, and made his way to the bathroom. She was standing in the tub, sinuously soaping her back, or at least parts of her narrow, variously dimpled, glistening back, which she could reach by throwing her arm across her shoulder. Her hair was up, with a kerchief or something twisted around it. The mirror reflected a brown armpit and a popping pale nipple. Ready in a sec, she sang out. Krug slammed the door with a great show of disgust. He stalked to the nursery and helped David to change his shoes. She was still in the bathroom when the man from the Anglisket Club brought a meat pie, rice pudding, and her adolescent buttocks. When the waiter had gone, she emerged, shaking her hair, and ran into her room while she slipped into a black frock and a minute later ran out again and started to lay the table. By the time the dinner was over, the newspaper had come in the afternoon mail. What news could there be? Chapter 13. The government had taken to sending him a good deal of printed matter, advertising its achievements and aims, together with the telephone bill and his dentist's Christmas greeting. He would find in his mailbox some mimeographed circular running thus: Dear citizen, according to Article 521 of our Constitution, the following of 4 freedoms are to be enjoyed by the nation. 1. Freedom of speech. 2. Freedom of the press. 3. Freedom of meetings. And 4. Freedom of processions. These freedoms are guaranteed by placing at the disposal of people efficient printing machines, adequate supplies of paper, well-aerated halls, and broad streets. What should one understand by first 2 freedoms? For a citizen of our state, a newspaper is a collective organizer whose business is to prepare its readers for the accomplishment of various assignments allotted to them, whereas in other countries, newspapers are purely business ventures, firms that sell their printed wares to the public, and therefore do their best to attract the public by means of lurid headlines and naughty stories. The main object of our press is to supply such information as would give every citizen a clear perception of the knotty problems presented by civic and international affairs. Consequently, they guide the activities and the emotions of their readers in the necessary direction. In other countries, we observe an enormous number of competing organs. Each newspaper tugs its own way, and this baffling diversity of tendencies produces complete confusion in the mind of the man in the street. In our truly democratic country, a homogeneous press is responsible before the nation for the correctness of the political education which it provides. The article in our newspapers are not the outcome of this or that individual fancy, but a mature, carefully prepared message of the reader, who in return receives it with the same seriousness and intenseness of thought. Another important feature of our press is the voluntary collaboration of local correspondence, letters, suggestions, discussions, criticism, and so on. Thus we observe that our citizens have free access to the papers, a state of affairs which is unknown anywhere else. True, in other countries there is a lot of talk about freedom, but in reality a lack of funds does not allow one the use of printed word. Millionaire and a working man clearly do not enjoy equal opportunities. Our press is the public property of our nation, therefore it is not run on a commercial basis. Even the advertisements in a capitalistic newspaper can influence its political trend. This, of course, would be quite impossible here. Our newspapers are published by the governmental and public organizations and are absolutely independent of individual, private, and commercial interests. Independence, in its turn, is synonymous with freedom. This is obvious. Our newspapers are completely and absolutely independent of such influences as do not coincide with the interests of the people to whom they belong and whom they serve, the exclusion of all other masters. Thus our country enjoys the use of free speech not in theory but in real practice. Obvious again, the constitutions of other countries also mention various freedoms. In reality, however, these freedoms are extremely restricted. A shortage of paper limits the freedom of the press, unheated halls do not encourage free gatherings, and under the pretext of regulating traffic, the police break up demonstrations and processions. Generally, the newspapers of other countries are in the service of capitalists who either have their own organs or acquire columns in other papers. Recently, for instance, a journalist called Ballplayer was sold by one of the businessmen to another for several $1,000s. On the other hand, when 500,000 American textile workers went on strike, the papers wrote about kings and queens, movies, and theaters. The most popular photograph, which appeared in all capitalist newspapers of that period, was a picture of 2 rare butterflies, glittering vesimi Jvetami Raduki with all the hues of the rainbow, but not a word about the strike of the textile workers. As our leader said, the workers know that freedom of speech is the so-called democratic countries is an empty sound. In our own country, there cannot be any contradiction between the reality and the rights granted to the citizens by Paduk's constitution where we have sufficient supplies of paper, plenty of good printing presses, spacious and warm public halls, and splendid avenues and parks. We welcome queries and suggestions, photographs, and detailed booklets mailed free on application. I will keep it, thought Krug. I shall have it treated by some special process which will make it endure far into the future, to the eternal delight of free humorists. Oh yes, I will keep it. As for news, there was practically none in the Equalist or the Evening Bell, or any of the other government-controlled dailies. The editorials, however, were superb. We believe that the only true art is the art of discipline. All other arts in our perfect city are but submissive variations of the supreme trumpet call. We love the corporate body, and we belong better than ourselves, and still better do we love the ruler, who symbolizes the body in terms of our times. We are for perfect cooperation, blending and balancing the three orders of the state, the productive, the executive, and the contemplative one. We are for an absolute community of interests among fellow citizens. We are for the viral harmony between lover and beloved. As Krug read this, he experienced a faint Lacedaemonian sensation. Whips and rods, music, a strange nocturnal terrors. He knew slightly the author of the article, a shabby old man who, under the pen name of Pankrat Sukutin, had edited a polygrammistic magazine years ago. Another serious article. It was curious how austere newspapers had become. A person who had never belonged to the Masonic Lodge or a fraternity, club, union, or the like is an abnormal and dangerous person. Of course, some organizations used to be pretty bad and are forbidden today, but nevertheless it is better for a man to have belonged to a politically incorrect organization than not to have belonged to any organization at all. As a model that every citizen ought to sincerely admire and follow, we should like to mention a neighbor of ours who confesses that nothing in the world, not even the most thrilling detective story, not even his young wife's plump charms, not even the daydreams every young man has of becoming an executive someday, can view the weekly pleasure of foregathering with his lights and singing community songs in an atmosphere of good cheer and let-aside good business. Lately, the elections of the Council of Elders were taking up a good deal of space. A list of candidates, 30 in number, drawn by special commission under Paduk's management, was circulated throughout the country, and these voters had to select 11. The same commission nominated back groups, that is, certain clusters of names received the support of special agents called megaphone shishki, a megaphone-armed backers, and the boosted civic virtues of the candidates at street corners, thus creating the illusion of hectic election fight. The whole business was extremely confused, and it did not matter in the least who won, who lost, but nevertheless the newspapers worked themselves into a state of mad agitation, giving every day and then every hour, by means of special editions, the results of the struggle in this or that district. An interesting feature was that the most exciting moments, teams of agricultural or industrial workers, like insects driven to copulation by some unusual atmospheric condition, would suddenly issue challenges to other such teams, declaring their desire to arrange production matches in honor of the elections. Therefore, the net result of these elections was not any particular change in the composition of the council, but a tremendously enthusiastic, albeit somewhat exhausting, zoom curve in the manufacture of reaping machines, cream caramels, and bright wrappers with pictures of naked girls soaping their shoulder blades, Kobendecken Schrauben, a piston flower bolts, neat whipping, lever dollies, Blechtafel, sheet iron, Krakmauschiki, starch collars for men and boys, Glockenmetal, Bronzo de Campagne, Geschützbronze, Bronzo de Canoni, Glasspalgen, Vojtukujivini Mecca, and other useful gadgets. Detailed accounts of various meetings of factory people or collective kitchen gardeners, snappy articles devoted to the problems of bookkeeping, denunciations, news of activities in innumerable professional unions, and the clipped accents of poems printed en escalier, incidentally tripling per line on an honorarium dedicated to Paduk, completely replaced the comfortable murders, marriages, and boxing matches of happier and more flippant times. It was as if one side of the globe had been struck with paralysis, while the other smiled an incredulous and slightly foolish smile. Chapter 14. He had never indulged in the search for the true substance, the one, the absolute, the diamond suspended from the Christmas tree of the cosmos. He had always felt the faint ridicule of a finite mind peering at the iridescence of the invisible through the prison guards of the integers. And even if the thing could be caught, why should he, or anybody else for that matter, the phenomena to lose its curls, its mask, its mirror, and become the bald nonemon? On the other hand, as some of the wiser neo-mathematicians thought, the physical world could be said to consist in measure groups, tangles, or stresses, sunset swarms of electric midgets, moving like mouches volants on a shadowy background that lay outside the scope of physics, then surely the meek restriction of one's interest to measuring the measurable smacked of the most humiliating futility. Take yourself away, you with your rulers and scales, for without your rules, in an unscheduled event or other, the paper chase of science barefooted matter does overtake light. We shall imagine then a prism or prison, where rainbows are but octaves of ethereal vibrations, and where cosmogonists with transparent heads keep walking into each other and passing through each other's vibrating voids, while all around various frames of reference pulsate with Fitzgerald contractions. Then we give a good shake to the telescopoid kaleidoscope, for what is your cosmos but an instrument containing small bits of colored glass by which an arrangement of mirrors appear in variety of symmetrical forms when rotated, and throw the darn thing away. How many of us have begun building anew, or thought that they were building anew when they survived their construction, and lo, Heraclitus, the weeping willow, was shimmering by the door, and Parmenides, the smoke, was coming out of the chimney, and Pythagoras, already inside, was drawing the shadows of the window frames on the bright polished floor where the flies played. I settle and you buzz up, then I buzz up and you settle, then jerk, 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 then we both buzz up. Long summer days, all go playing the piano. Music, order. The trouble with Krug, thought Krug, was that for long summer years and the enormous success he had delicately taken apart the systems of others, and had acquired thereby a reputation for impish sense of humor and delightful common sense, whereas in fact he was a sad hog of a man, and the common sense affair had turned out to be the gradual digging of a pit to accommodate pure smiling madness. He was constantly being called one of the most eminent philosophers of his time, but he knew that nobody could really define what special features his philosophy had, or what eminent meant, or what his time exactly was, or who were the other worthies. When writers in foreign countries were called his disciples, he could never find in their writings anything remotely akin to the style or temper of thought which without his sanction critics had assigned to him, so that he finally began regarding himself, robust Rude Krug, as an illusion, or rather as a shareholder in an illusion, which was highly appreciated by a great number of cultured people, with a generous sprinkling of semi-cultured ones. It was much the same thing as is liable to happen in novels when the author and his yes characters assert that the hero is a great artist or a great poet, without, however, bringing any proofs, reproductions of his paintings, or samples of his poetry, indeed taking care not to bring such proofs, since any sample would be sure to fall short of the reader's expectations and fancy. Krug, while wondering who had puffed him up, who had projected him onto the screen of fame, could not help feeling that in some odd way he did deserve it, that he really was bigger and brighter than most of the men around him, but he also knew that people saw in him, without realizing it perhaps, was not an admirable expansion of positive matter, but a kind of inaudible frozen explosion, as if the reel had been stopped at the point where the bomb burst, with some debris gracefully poised in midair. When this type of mind, so good at creative destruction, says to itself, as any poor misled philosopher, "Oh, that cramped, uncomfortable I, that chest Mephisto, concealed in the cognito," might say, "Now I have cleared the ground, now I will build, and the gods of ancient philosophy shall not intrude," the result generally is a cold little heap of truisms fished out of the artificial lake into which they had been especially put for the purpose. What Krug hoped to fish out was something belonging not only to an undescribed species or genus of family or order, but something representing a brand new class. Now let us have this quite clear. What is more important to solve, the outer problem, space, time, master, the unknown without, or the inner one, life, thought, love, the unknown within, or again their point of contact, death? For we agree, do we not, that problems as problems do exist, even if the world be something made of nothing within nothing made of something? Or is outer and inner an illusion too, so that the great mountain may be said to stand 1,000 dreams high, and hope and terror can be easily charted as the capes and bays they helped to name? Answer, oh, that exquisite sight! A wary logician picking his way among the thorn bushes and pitfalls of thought, making a tree or cliff, this I have passed, this Nile is settled, looking back in other worlds, and cautiously testing some quaggy ground. Now let us proceed, having his carload of tourists stop at the base of a metaphor or simple example. That is supposed that an elevator, pressing on, surmounting all difficulties, and finally arriving in triumph at the very first tree he had marked. And then, thought Krug, on top of everything, I am a slave of images. We speak one thing, being like some other thing, when what we are really craving to do is to describe something that is like nothing on earth. Certain mind pictures have become so adulterated by the concept of time that we have come to believe in the actual existence of permanently moving bright fissure, the point of perception between our retrospective eternity, which we cannot recall, and the prospective one which we cannot know. We are not really able to measure time because no gold second is kept in a case in Paris, but quite frankly, do you not imagine a length of several hours more exactly than a length of several miles? And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the problem of death. It may be said with as fair an amount of truth as is practically available that to seek perfect knowledge is the attempt to point in space and time to identify itself with every other point. Death is either the instantaneous gaining of perfect knowledge, similar to the, say, instantaneous disintegration of some ivy composing the circular dungeon where formerly the prisoner had to content himself with only two small apertures optically fusing into one, whilst now, with the disappearance of all walls, he can survey the entire circular landscape, or absolute nothing, nicto. And this, snorted Krug, is what you call a brand new class of thinking. Have some more fish. Who could have believed that his powerful brain will become so disorganized? In the old days, whenever he took up a book, he underscored passages. His lightning notes in the margin used to come together almost automatically, and his new essay, a new chapter, was ready. But now he was almost incapable of lifting the heavy pencil from the dusty, thick carpet where it had fallen from his limp hand. Chapter 15. On the 4th, he searched through some old papers and found a reprint of Henry Doyle lecture, which he had delivered before the Philosophical Society of Washington. He reread a passage he had polemically quoted in regard to the idea of substance. When a body is sweet and white all over, the motions of whiteness and sweetness are repeated in various places and intermixed. Dami basia mil. On the 5th, he went on foot to the Ministry of Justice and demanded an interview in connection with the arrest of his friends, but it gradually transpired that the place had been turned into a hotel and that the man who had taken for a high official was merely the head waiter. On the 8th, he was showing David how to touch a pellet of bread with the tips of two crossed fingers so as to produce a kind of mirror effect in terms of contact, the feel of a second pellet. Mariette laid her bare forearm and elbow upon his shoulder and watched with interest, fidgeting all the time, tickling his temple with her brown hair, and scratching her thigh with a knitting needle. On the 10th, a student called Focus attempted to see him, but was not admitted, partly because he never allowed any scholastic matters to bother him outside his for the moment non-existent office, but mainly because there were reasons to think that this Focus might be a government spy. On the night of the 12th, he dreamt that he was surreptitiously enjoying Mariette while she sat wincing a little in his lap during the rehearsal of a play in which she was supposed to be his daughter. On the night of the 13th, he was drunk. On the 15th, an unknown voice on the telephone informed him that Blanche Hedron, his friend's sister, had been smuggled abroad and was now safe in Budafolk, a place situated apparently somewhere in Central Europe. On the 17th, he received a curious letter. Rich sir, an agent of mine abroad has been informed by two of your friends, Messrs. Berens and Marble, that you are seeking to purchase a reproduction of Turok's masterpiece, Escape. If you care to visit my shop, Bric-a-Brac, Demerlamp Street 14, around 5 in the afternoon, Monday, Tuesday, or Friday, I shall be glad to discuss the possibility of your large blot eclipse the end of the sentence. The letter was signed by Peter Quist Antiques. After a prolonged study of a map of the city, he discovered the street in its northwestern corner. He laid down his magnifying glass and removed his spectacles, making those little sticky sounds he was wont to make at such times. He put his spectacles on again and took up the glass and tried to discover whether any of the bus routes marked in red would bring him there. Yes, it could be done. In a casual flash, for no reason at all, he recollected a way Olga had of lifting her left eyebrow when she looked at herself in the mirror. Do all people have that? A face, a phrase, a landscape, an air bubble from the past suddenly floating up as if released by the head warden's child from a cell in the brain while the mind is at work, or some totally different matter? Something of the sort also occurs just before falling asleep, when that you think you are thinking is not at all what you think, or two parallel passenger trains of thought, one overtaking the other, outside the roughish edges of the air, had a touch of spring about them, although the year had only begun. An amusing new law demanded that everyone boarding a motor bus not only show his or her passport, but also give the conductor a signed and numbered photograph. The process of checking whether the likeness, signature, and number corresponded to those of the passport was a lengthy one. It had been further decreed that in case of a passenger did not have the exact fare, 17 1/3 cents per mile, whatever surplus he paid would be refunded to him at a remote post office, provided he took his place in the queue there not more than 33 hours after leaving the bus. The writing and stamping of receipts by a harassed conductor resulted in some more delay, and since, in accordance with the same decree, the bus stopped only at these points at which not fewer than 3 passengers wished to alight, a good deal of confusion was added to the delay. In spite of these measures, buses were singularly crowded these days. Nevertheless, Krug managed to reach his destination together with 2 youths whom he had bribed, 10 kroons each for helping to make up the necessary trio. He landed precisely where he had decided to land. His 2 companions, who frankly confessed that they were making a living of it, immediately boarded a moving trolley car, where the regulations were still more complicated. It had grown dark while he had been traveling, and a crooked little street lived up to its name. He felt excited, insecure, apprehensive. He saw the possibility of escaping from Paducgrad into a foreign country, as a kind of return into his own past, because his own country had been a free country in the past. Granted that space and time were one, escape and return became interchangeable. The peculiar character of the past, bliss unvalued at the time, her fiery hair, her voice reading of small humanized animals to her child, looked as if it could be replaced or at least mimicked by the character of a country where this child could be brought up in security, liberty, peace, a long, long beach dotted with bodies, a sunny honey and a satin Latin advertisement of some American stuff somewhere seen, somehow remembered. My God, he thought, que j'ai et vu. This ought to have been done months ago. The poor dear man was right. The street named to be full of bookshops and dim little pubs. Here we are, pictures of birds and flowers, old books, and polka-dotted china cat. He went in. The owner of the shop, Peter Quist, was a middle-aged man with a brown face, a flat nose, and clipped black mustache and wavy black hair. He was simply but neatly attired in a blue and white striped washable summer suit. As Krug entered, he was saying goodbye to an old lady who had old-fashioned feathery gray bow around her neck. She glanced at Krug keenly before lowering her voilette and swept out. Know who that was? Asked Quist. Krug shook his head. Ever met the late president's widow? Yes, said Krug, I have. And what about his sister? Ever met her? I do not think so. Well, that was his sister, said Quist negligently. Krug blew his nose, and while wiping it, cast a look at the contents of the shop, mainly books. A heap of Librairie Hachette, volumes, Moliere, and the like. Vile paper, disintegrating covers were rotting in the corner. A beautiful plate from some early 19th century insect book showed an ocellated hawk moth and its shagreen caterpillar, which clung to a twig and arched its neck. A huge, large, discolored photograph, 1894, representing a dozen or so bewhiskered men in tights with artificial limbs. Some had as many as 2 arms and 1 leg, and a brightly colored picture of a Mississippi flatboat graced one of the panels. Well, said Quist, I am certainly glad to meet you. Shake hands. It was a Turk who gave me your address, said the genial antiquarian, as he and Krug settled down in 2 armchairs in the depth of the shop. Before we come to any arrangement, I want to tell you quite frankly, all my life I have been smuggling dope, diamonds, old masters, and now people. I do it solely to meet the expenses of my private urges and orgies, but I do it well. Yes, said Krug, yes, I see. I tried to locate Turok some time ago, but he was always on business. Well, he got your eloquent letter just before he was arrested. Yes, said Krug, yes. So he has been arrested. That I did not know. I am in touch with the whole group, explained Quist with a slight bow. Tell me, said Krug, have you any news from my friends, the Maximovs, Ember, Hedron? No, though I can easily imagine how distasteful they must find the prison regime. Allow me to embrace you, Professor. He leaned forward and gave Krug an old-fashioned kiss on the left shoulder. Tears came to Krug's eyes. Quist coughed self-consciously and continued. However, let us not forget that I am a hard businessman and therefore above these unnecessary emotions. True, I want to save you, but I also want money for it. You would have to pay me 2,000 kroons. It is not much, said Krug. Anyway, said Quist dryly, it is sufficient to pay the brave men who take my shivering clients across the border. He got up, fetched a box of Turkish cigarettes, offered one to Krug, who refused, lit up, carefully arranged the burning match in pink and violet seashell or ashtray so that it would go on burning. Its end squirmed, blackened. You will excuse me, he said, for having yielded to a movement of affection and exaltation. See this scar? He showed the back of his hand. This, he said, I received in a duel in Hungary 4 years ago. We used cavalry sabers. In spite of my several wounds, I managed to kill my opponent. He was a great man, a brilliant brain, a gentle heart, but he had the misfortune of jokingly referring to my young sister as Cette petite femme qui se croit Ophelia. You see, the romantic little thing had attempted to drown herself in the swimming pool. He smoked in silence. And there is no way to get them out of there? Asked Krug. Out of where? Oh, I see. No, my organization is of a different type. We call it Frugans, frontier geese in our professional jargon, not Turmbroken, prison breakers. So you are willing to pay me what I ask, Bene? Would you still be willing if I asked as much money as you have in the world? Certainly, said Krug. Any of the foreign universities would repay me. Quist laughed and became rather coyly engaged in fishing a bit of cotton out of a little bottle containing some tablets. You know what, he said with a simper, if I were an agent provocateur, which of course I am not, I would make at this point the following mental observation. Madamka, supposing this to be your nickname in the spying department, is eager to leave the country no matter what it would cost him. And by golly, you would be right, said Krug. But you will also have to make a special present to me, continued Quist, namely your library, your manuscripts. Every scrap of writing. You would have to be as naked as an earthworm when you left this country. Splendid, said Krug. I shall save the contents of my wastebasket for you. Well, said Quist, if so, then this is about all. When could you arrange it? Asked Krug. Arrange what? My flight. Oh, that. Well, are you in a hurry? Yes, in a tremendous hurry. I want to get my child out of here. Child? Yes, a boy of 8. Yes, of course, you have a child. There was a curious pause. A dull red slowly suffused Quist's face. He looked down. With soft claws he plucked at his mouth and cheeks. What fools they had been. Now promotion was his. My clients, said Quist, do not have to do about 20 miles on foot through blueberry woods and cranberry bogs. The rest of the time they lie at the bottom of trucks, and every jolt tells. The food is scant and crude. The satisfaction of natural needs has to be denied oneself for 10 hours at a stretch or more. Your physique is good. You will stand it. Of course, taking your child with you is quite out of the question. Oh, I think he would be as quiet as a mouse, said Krug, and I could carry him as long as I could carry myself. One day, murmured Quist, you are not able to carry him a couple of miles to the railway station. I beg your pardon? I said some day you will not be able to carry him as far as it is from here to the station. That, however, is not the essential point. Do you visualize the dangers? Vaguely, but I could never leave my child behind. There was another pause. Quist twisted a bit of cotton round the head of a match and probed the inner recesses of his left ear. He inspected with satisfaction the gold he obtained. Well, he said, I shall see what can be done. We must keep in touch, of course. Could we not fix an appointment? Suggested Krug, rising from his chair and looking for his hat. I mean, you might want some money in advance. Yes, I can see it. It is under the table, thanks. You are welcome, said Quist. What about some day next week? Would Tuesday do, around 5 in the afternoon? That would be perfect. Would you care to meet me on Neptune Bridge, say near the 20th lamppost? Gladly. At your service. I confess our little talk has clarified the whole situation to a most marvelous degree. It is a pity you cannot stay longer. I shudder, said Krug, to think of the long journey home. It will take me hours to get back. Oh, but I can show you a shorter way, said Quist. Wait a minute, a very short and pleasant cut. He went to the foot of the winding staircase and looking out called, Mac! There was no answer. He waited, with his face now turned upwards, now half turned to Krug, not really looking at Krug, blinking, listening. Mac! Again there was no reply, and after a while Quist decided to go upstairs and fetch what he wanted himself. Krug examined some poor things on the shelf, an old rusty bicycle bell, a brown tennis racket, an ivory pin holder with a tiny pebble of crystal. He peeped. Closing one eye, he saw a cinnabar sunset and a black bridge. Goose aus Potipad. Quist came down the steps, humming and skipping, with a bundle of keys in his hand. Of these he selected the brightest and unlocked a secret door under the stairs. Silently he pointed down a long passage. There were obsolete posters and elbowed water pipes in its dimly lit walls. Why, thank you very much, said Krug. But Quist had already closed the door after him. Krug walked down the passage, his overcoat unbuttoned, his hands thrust into his trouser pockets. His shadow accompanied him like a Negro porter carrying too many bags. Presently he came to another door consisting of rough boards roughly knocked together. He pushed it open and stepped into his own backyard. Next morning he went down to inspect this exit from an aggressive angle, but now it was cunningly camouflaged, merging partly with some planks that were propped against the wall of the yard, and partly with the door of a proletarian privy. On some bricks nearby the mournful detective assigned to his house, and an organ grinder of sorts was playing chemin de fer. A soiled 9 of spades lay on the ash-strewn ground at their feet, and with a pang of impatient desire he visualized a railway platform, and glanced at a playing card and bits of orange peel enlivening the coal dust between the rails under a Pullman car, which was still waiting for him in a blend of summer and smoke, but a minute later would be gliding out of the station, away, away into the fair mist of the incredible Carolinas, and following it along the darkling swamps and hanging faithfully in the evening aether, and slipping through the telegraph wires, as chaste as a wove paper watermark, as smoothly moving as the transparent tangle of cells that floats athwart an overworked eye. The lemon pale double of the lamp that shone above the passenger would mysteriously travel across the turquoise landscape in the window. Chapter 16. 3 chairs placed one behind the other. Same idea. The what? The cowcatcher. A Chinese checkerboard resting against the legs of the first chair represented the cowcatcher. The last chair was the observation car. I see, and now the engine driver must go to bed. Hurry up, Daddy. Get on, the train is moving. Look here, my darling. Oh, please, sit down for a minute. No, my darling, I told you, but it's just 1 minute. Oh, Daddy, Mariette does not want to. You don't want to. Nobody wants to travel with me on my super train. Not now. It is really time to be going to bed, to be going to school, bedtime, dinner time, term time. Never just time. Time to get up. Time to go out. Time to go home. Time to put out all the lights. Time to die. And what agony, thought Krug the thinker, to love so madly a little creature, formed in some mysterious fashion, even more mysterious to us than it had been to the very first thinkers in their pale olive groves, by the fusion of 2 mysteries, or rather 2 sets of a trillion mysteries each, formed by a fusion which is at the same time a matter of choice and a matter of chance and a matter of pure enchantment, thus formed and then permitted to accumulate trillions of its own mysteries, the whole suffused with consciousness, which is the only real thing in the world and the greatest mystery of all. He saw David a year or 2 older, sitting on a vividly labeled trunk at the customs house on the pier. He saw him riding a bicycle in between brilliant forsythia shrubs and thin naked birch trees down a path with no bicycle sign. He saw him on the edge of a swimming pool, lying on his stomach, in wet black shorts, one shoulder blade simply raised, sharply raised, one hand stretched, shaking out iridescent water that clogged a toy destroyer. He saw him in one of those fabulous corner stores that have face creams on one side and ice creams on the other, perched there at the bar and craning towards the syrup pumps. He saw him throwing a ball with a special flip of the wrist, unknown in the old country. He saw him as a youth crossing in a technicolored campus. He saw him wearing the curious garb jockey-like except for the shoes and stockings used by players in the American ball game. He saw him learning to fly. He saw him aged 2 sitting on his chamber pot, jerking, crooning, moving by jerks on his scraping chamber pot right across the nursery floor. He saw him as a man of 40. On the eve of the day fixed by Quist, he found himself on the bridge. He was out reconnoitering, since it had occurred to him that as a meeting place it might be unsafe because of the soldiers, but the soldiers had gone long ago. The bridge was deserted. Quist could come whenever he liked. Krug had only 1 glove. He had forgotten his glasses, so could not reread the careful note Quist had given him with all the passwords and addresses and a sketch map and a key to the code of Krug's whole life. It mattered little, however. The sky immediately overhead was quilted with a livid and billowy expanse of thick cloud. Very large, grayish, semi-transparent, irregularly shaped snowflakes slowly and vertically descended, and when they touched the dark water of the curve, they floated upon it instead of melting at once, and this was strange. Further on, beyond the edge of the cloud, a sudden nakedness of heaven and river smiled at the bridge-browed observer, and a mother-of-pearl radiance touched up the curves of the remote mountains, from which the river, the smiling sadness, and the first evening lights in the windows of the riverside buildings were variously derived. Watching the snowflakes upon the dark and beautiful water, Krug argued that either the flakes were real, and the water was not real water, or else the latter was real, whereas the flakes were made of some special insoluble stuff. In order to settle the question, he let his matless glove fall from the bridge, but nothing abnormal happened. The glove simply pierced the corrugated surface of the water, with his extended index, dived, and was gone. On the south bank from which he had come, he could see, further upstream, Paduc's pink palace and the bronze dome of the cathedral, and the leafless trees of a public garden. On the other side of the river there were rows of old tenement houses beyond which, unseen but throbbingly present, stood the hospital where she had died. As he brooded thus, sitting sideways on a stone bench and looking at the river, a tugboat dragging a barge appeared in the distance, and at the same time one of the last snowflakes, the cloud overhead, seemed to be dissolving in the snow in the now generously flushed sky. Grazed its underlip. It was a regular soft wet flake, he reflected, but perhaps those had been descending upon the water itself had been different ones. The tug steadily approached. As it was about to plunge under the bridge, the great black funnel, doubly encircled with crimson, was pulled back and down by 2 men clutching at its rope and grinning with sheer exertion. One of them was a Chinese, as were most of the river people and washermen of the town. On the barge behind, half a dozen brightly colored shirts were drying, and some potted geraniums could be seen aft, and a very fat Olga in the yellow blouse he disliked, arms akimbo, looked at Krug as the barge in its turn was smoothly engulfed by the arch of the bridge. He awoke, asprawl in his leather armchair, and immediately understood that something extraordinary had happened. It had nothing to do with the dream, or quite unprovoked and rather ridiculously physical discomfort he felt, a local congestion, or anything that he recalled in connection with the appearance of this room, untidy and dusty in an untidy and dusty light, or the time of day, 8:15 p.m. He had fallen asleep after an early supper. What had happened was that again he knew he could write. He went to the bathroom, took a cold shower like the good little Boy Scout he was, and tingling with mental eagerness and feeling comfortable and clean in pajamas and dressing gown, let his fountain pen stick into its fill, and then remembered that it was David's tucking-in hour and decided to get it over with so as not to be interrupted by nursery calls. In the passage 3 chairs still stood, one behind the other. David was lying in bed with rapid back-and-forth movements of his lead pencil was evenly shading a portion of sheet paper placed on the fine-grained cover of the big book. This produced a not unpleasant sound, both shuffling and silky, with a kind of rising, buzzing vibration underlying the scrabble. The punctate texture of the cover gradually appeared as a gray grating on the paper, and then, with magical precision, and quite independent of the accidentally oblique direction of the pencil strokes, the impressed word Atlas came out in tall, narrow, white letters. One wondered if by shading one's life in like fashion, the pencil cracked. David tried to straighten the loose tip in its pine socket and use the pencil in such a way as to have the longer projection of the wood act as a prop, but the lead broke off for good. And anyway, said Krug, who was impatient to get back to his own writing, it is time to put out the lights. First the travel story, said David. For several nights already Krug had been involving a serial which dealt with the adventures awaiting David on his way to a distant country. We'd stopped at the point where he crouched at the bottom of his sleigh, holding our breaths, very, very quiet under sheepskin blankets and empty potato sacks. No, not tonight, said Krug. It is much too late, and I am busy. It is not too late, cried David, sitting up suddenly with blazing eyes and striking the atlas with his fist. Krug removed the book and bent over David to kiss him good night. David abruptly turned away to the wall. Just as you like, said Krug, but you'd better say good night. Pokonoi nochi, because I'm not going to come again. David drew the bedclothes over his head, sulking. With a little cough, Krug unbent and put out the lamp. I am not going to sleep, said David in a muffled voice. That's up to you, said Krug, trying to imitate Olga's smooth pedagogic tones. A pause in the dark. Pokonoi nochi, dushka, Anamula, said Krug from the threshold. Silence. He told himself with a certain degree of irritation that he would have to come back in 10 minutes and go through the whole act in detail. This was, as often happened, only the first rough draft of the good-night ritual, but then, of course, sleep might settle the matter. He closed the door, and he turned to the bend of the passage, bumped into Mariette. Look where you are going, child, he said up sharply, and hit his knee against one of the chairs left by David. In this preliminary report on infinite consciousness, a certain scumbling of the essential outline is unavoidable. We have to discuss sight without being able to see. The knowledge we may acquire in the course of such a discussion will necessarily stand in the same relation to the truth as the black peacock spot produced intraoptically by pressure on the palpebra does in regard to a garden path brindled with genuine sunlight. Ah, yes, the glare of the matter instead of its yolk. The reader will say with a sigh, Konu ma vu. The same old sapless sophistry, the same old dust-coated alembics and thought seaweeds along the witch, like a witch on her bosom. But you are wrong, you captious fool. Ignore my invective, a question of impetus, and consider the following point. Can we work ourselves into a state of abject panic by trying to imagine the infinite number of years, the infinite folds of a dark velvet stuff, their dryness into your mouth, and a word infinite past which extends on the minus side of the day of our birth? We cannot. Why? For the simple reason that we have already gone through eternity, have already non-existed once, and have discovered that this nyant holds no terrors whatever. We are now trying unsuccessfully to do is to fill the abyss we have safely crossed with terrors borrowed from the abyss in front, which abyss has borrowed itself from the infinite past. Thus we live in a stocking, which is in the process of being turned inside out without our ever knowing for sure to what phase of the process our moment of consciousness corresponds. Once launched, he went into writing with a somewhat pathetic, if viewed from the side, gusto. He was wounded. Something bad had cracked. But for the time being, a rush of second-rate inspiration and somewhat precious imagery kept him going nicely. After an hour or so of this sort of thing, he stopped and reread the 4.5 pages he had written. The way was now clear. Incidentally, one compact sentence he had referred to several religions, not forgetting that wonderful Jewish sect, whose dream of the gentle young rabbi dying on the Roman crooks had spread all over northern lands, and had dismissed them together with ghosts and kobolds. The pale, starry heaven of untrammeled philosophy lay before him, but he thought he would like a drink. With his bare fountain pen still in his hand, he trudged to the dining room. She again. "Is he asleep?" he asked in a kind of atonic grunt, without turning his head, while bending for the brandy in the lower part of the sideboard. "Should be," she replied. He uncorked the bottle and poured some of its contents into a green glass goblet. "Thank you," she said. He could not help glancing at her. She sat at the table mending a stocking. Her bare neck and legs looked uncommonly pale in contrast to her black frock and black slippers. She glanced up from her work, her head cocked, soft wrinkles on her forehead. "Well," she said. "No liquor for you," he answered. "Root beer, if you like. I think there is some in the icebox." "You nasty man," she said, lowering her untidy eyelashes and crossing her legs anew. "You horrible man. I feel pretty tonight." "Pretty what?" he asked, slamming the door of the sideboard. "Just pretty. Pretty all over." "Good night," he said. "Don't sit up too late." "May I sit in your room while you are writing?" "Certainly not." He turned to go, but she called him back. "Your pen's on the sideboard." Moaning, he came back with his goblet and took the pen. "When I'm alone," she said, "I sit and do like this. Like a cricket. Listen, please. Listen to what? Don't you hear?" She sat with parted lips, slightly moving her tightly crossed thighs, producing a tiny sound, soft labiate, with an alternate crepitation as if she were rubbing the palms of her hands, which, however, lay idle. "Chirruping like a poor lone cricket," she said. "I happen to be partly deaf," remarked Krug, and trudged back to his room. He reflected he ought to have gone to see whether David was asleep. Oh, he should be, because otherwise he would have heard his father's footsteps and called. Krug did not care to pass again by the open door of the dining room, and so told himself that David was at least half asleep and likely to be disturbed by an intrusion, however well meant. It is not quite clear why he indulged in all this ascetic self-restraint business, when he might have ridden himself so deliciously of this quite natural tension and discomfort with the assistance of that keen Puella, for whose lively little abdomen younger Romans than he would have paid the Syrian slavers 20,000 denarii or more. Perhaps he was held back by certain subtle supermatrimonial scruples, or by the dismal sadness of the whole thing. Unfortunately, his urge to write had suddenly petered out, and he did not know what to do with himself. He was not sleepy, having slept after dinner. The brandy only added to the nuisance. He was a big, heavy man on the hairy sort, with a somewhat Beethoven-like face. He had lost his wife in November. He had taught philosophy. He was exceedingly virile. His name was Adam Krug. He reread what he had written, crossed out the witch on her besom, and started to pace the room with his hands on the pockets of his robe. Gregoire peered from under the armchair. The radiator purled. The street was silent behind thick dark blue curtains. Little by little his thoughts resumed their mysterious course. The nutcracker, cracking one hollow second after another, came to a full meaty once again. An indistinct sound like the echo of some remote ovation met the appearance of the new Eidolon. A fingernail scraped, tapped. "What is it? What do you want?" No answer, smooth silence, then an audible dimple, then silence again. He opened the door. She was standing there in her nightgown. A slow blink concealed and revealed her again the queer stare of her dark, opaque eyes. She had a pillow under her arm and an alarm clock in her hand. She sighed deeply. "Please let me come in," she said, the somewhat Lemurian features of her small white face puckering up entreatingly. "I am terrified. I simply can't be alone. I feel something dreadful is about to happen. May I sleep here, please?" She crossed the room on tiptoe and with infinite care put the round-faced clock down on the night table. Penetrating her flimsy garment, the light of the lamp brought out her body in peach-blow silhouette. "Is it okay?" she whispered. "I shall make myself very small." Krug turned away, and as he was standing near a bookcase, pressed down and released again a torn edge of calf's leather on the back of an old Latin poet. "Brevis lux, dami masia mil." He pounded in slow motion the book with his fist. When he looked at her again, she had cramped the pillow under her nightgown in front and was shaking with mute laughter. She patted her false pregnancy, but Krug did not laugh, knitting her brow and letting the pillow and some peach petals drop to the floor between her ankles. "Don't you like me at all?" she said, inquit. If he thought my heart could be heard as Paduk's heart is, that its thunderous thumping would awaken the dead, but let the dead sleep. Going on with her act, she flung herself on the bedded sofa and lay there prone, her rich brown hair and the edge of a flushed ear in the full blaze of the lamp. Her pale young legs invited an old man's groping hand. He sat down near her morosely, with clenched teeth. He accepted the banal invitation, but no sooner had he touched her than she got up and, lifting and twisting her thin, white, chestnutty-smelling bare arms, yawned. "I guess I'll go back now," she said. Krug saying nothing, Krug sat there, sullen and heavy, bursting with vine-ripe desire, poor thing. She sighed, but her knee against the bedding, and baring her shoulder, investigated the marks that some playmate's teeth had left near a small, very dark birthmark on the diaphanous skin. "Do you want me to go?" she asked. He shook his head. "Shall we make love if I stay?" His hands compressed her frail hips as if he were taking her down from a tree. "You know too little or much too much," he said. "If too little, then run along, lock yourself up, never come near me, because this is going to be a bestial explosion, and you might get badly hurt. I warn you, I am nearly 3 times your age, and a great, big, sad hog of a man, and I don't love you." She looked down at the agony of his senses, tittered. "Oh, you don't? My Puella mia, my hot, vulgar, heavenly, delicate little Puella. This is the translucent amphora, which I slowly set down by the handles. This is the pink moth clinking, a deafening din, the doorbell loud knocking, interrupted those anthological preambulations. "Oh, please, please," she muttered, wriggling up to him. "Let's go on, we have just enough time to do it before they break the door, please." He pushed her away violently and snatched up his dressing gown from the floor. "It's your last chance," she sang out with that special rising note which produces, as it were, a faint interrogatory ripple, the liquid reflection of a question mark. Catching up and hastily interlacing the ends of the brown cord of his somewhat monastic robe, he swung down the passage, followed by Mariette, and a hunchback again unlocked the impatient door. Young woman with a pistol in gloved hand, 2 raw youths of SB schoolboy brigade, repulsive patches of unshaven skin and pustules, plaid wool shirts, worn loose and flapping. "Hi, Linda," said Mariette. "Hi, Mary Chen," said the woman. She had an Equalist soldier's greatcoat carelessly hanging from her shoulders, and a crumpled military cap was rakishly poised on her neatly waved, honey-colored hair. Krug recognized her at once. "My fiancé is waiting outside in a car," she explained to Mariette, after giving her a smiling kiss. "The professor can go as he is. He will get some nice sterilized regulation togs at the place we are taking him to." "Is it my turn at last?" asked Krug. "How are you, Mary Chan?" "We shall go to a party after we drop the professor. Is that okay?" "That's fine," said Mariette, and then asked, lowering her voice, "Can I play with the nice boys?" Come, honey, you deserve better. Fact is, I have a big surprise for you. You kids get busy. The nursery is down there." "No, you don't," said Krug, blocking the way. "Let them pass, Professor. They are doing our duty, and they will not steal a pen. Step aside, Doc. We are doing our duty." There was a businesslike knuckle rap on the half-closed hall door when Linda, who stood on her with her back to it and against whose spine it gently butted, flung it wide open. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a smart semi-police uniform walked in with a heavyweight wrestler's rotund step. He had bushy black eyebrows, a square, heavy jaw, and the whitest of white teeth. "Max," said Linda, "this here is my little sister, escaped from a boarding school on fire. Mariette, this is my fiancé's best friend. I hope you two will like each other." "I sure hope we do," said the hefty Mac in a deep, mellow voice. Dental display, extended palm size of a steak for 5. "I sure am glad to meet a friend of Gustav," said Mariette demurely. Mac and Linda exchanged a twinkling smile. "I am afraid we have not made this too clear, honey. The fiancé in question is not Gustav, definitely not Gustav. Poor Gustav is by now an abstraction. You shall not pass," rumbled Krug, holding 2 youths at bay. "What happened?" asked Mariette. "Well, they had to wring his neck. He was a schlap, a failure, you see. A schlap who during his short life made many a fine arrest," remarked Mac with the generosity and broad-mindedness so characteristic of him. "This here belonged to him," said Linda in confidential tones, showing the pistol to her sister. "The flashlight too? No, that's Mac's." "My," said Mariette, reverently touching the huge leathery thing. One of the youths, propelled by Krug, collided with the umbrella stand. Now, will you please stop this unseemly scuffle," said Mac, pulling Krug back. Poor Krug, executed at cakewalk. The 2 youths at once made for the nursery. "They will frighten him," muttered and gasped Krug, trying to free himself from Mac's hold. "Let me go at once. Mariette, do me a favor." He frantically signaled her to run to the nursery and see that my child. Mariette looked at her sister and giggled. With wonderful professional precision and savoir-faire, Mac suddenly dealt Krug a cutting backhand blow with the edge of his pig-iron paw. The blow caught Krug neatly on the inside of the right arm and instantly paralyzed it. Mac proceeded to treat Krug's left arm in like fashion. Krug bent double, holding his head in his dead arms, sank down in one of the 3 chairs that stood, by now askew and meaningless, in the passage. "Mac's awfully good at this sort of thing," remarked Linda. "Yes, isn't he?" said Mariette. The sisters had not seen each other for some time and kept smiling and blinking sweetly and touching each other with limp, girlish gestures. That's a nice brooch," said the younger. "$3.50, said Linda, and fold adding itself to her chin. "Shall I go and put on my black lace panties and the Spanish dress?" said Mariette. "Oh, I think you look just cute in this rumpled nightie. Doesn't she, Mac?" "Sure," said Mac. "And you won't catch cold because there's a mean coat in the car." Owing to the door of the nursery suddenly opening before slamming again, David's voice was heard for a moment. Oddly enough, this child, instead of whimpering and crying for help, seemed to be trying to reason with his impossible visitors. Perhaps he had not been asleep after all. The sound of that dutiful and bland little voice was worse than the most anguished moaning. Krug moved his fingers. The numbness was gradually passing away. As calmly as possible, he again appealed to Mariette. "Does anybody know what he wants of me?" asked Mariette. "Look," said Mac to Adam. "Either you do what you're told or you don't. And if you don't, it's going to hurt like X. You see? Get up." "All right," said Krug. "I will get up. What next?" "Marsch, Vince. Go downstairs." And then David began to scream. Linda made a chick-chick sound. "Now those dumb kids have done it," and Mac looked at her for directions. Krug lurched towards the nursery. Simultaneously, David and Pale Blue, the little mite, ran out, but was immediately caught. "I want my daddy," he cried off stage. Having Mariette in the bathroom with the door open was making up her lips, Krug managed to reach his child. One of the hoodlums had pinned David to the bed. The other was trying to catch David's rapidly kicking feet. "Leave him alone! Mershapsi!" "A term of monstrous abuse," cried Krug. "They want him to be quiet, that's all," said Mac, who again had taken control of the situation. "David, my love," said Krug, "it's all right, they won't hurt you." The child, still held by the grinning youths, caught Krug by the fold of his dressing gown. This little hand must be unclenched. "It's all right, leave it to me, gentlemen. Don't touch him, my darling." Mac, who had enough of it, briskly kicked Krug in the shins and bundled him out. "They have torn my little one in two." "Look here, you brute," he said, half on his knees, clinging to the wardrobe in the passage. Mac was holding him by the front of the dressing gown and pulling. "I cannot leave my child to be tortured. Let him come with me, wherever you are taking me." A toilet was flushed. The 2 sisters joined the men and looked on with bored amusement. "My dear man," said Linda, "you quite understand that it is your child, or at least your late wife's child, and not a little owl of porcelain or something, but our duty is to take you away, and rest does not concern us." "Please let us be moving," pleaded Mariette. "It's getting frightfully late." "Allow me to telephone to Shem, one of the members of the Council of Elders," said Krug. "Just that, one telephone call." "Oh, do let us go," repeated Mariette. "The question is," said Mac, "will you go quietly under your own power, or shall I have to maim you and then roll you down the steps as we do with logs in Lagoden?" "Yes," said Krug, suddenly making up his mind. "Yes, logs. Yes, let us go. Let us get there quickly. After all, the solution is simple." "Put out the lights, Mariette," said Linda, "or we shall be accused of stealing this man's electricity." "I shall be back in 10 minutes," shouted Krug in the direction of the nursery, using the full force of his lungs. "And all for sake," muttered Mac, pushing him towards the door. "Mac," said Linda, "I'm afraid she might catch cold on the stairs. I think you'd better carry her down. Look, why doesn't he go first, then me, then you? Come on, pick her up." "I don't weigh much, you know," she said Mariette, raising her elbows towards Mac. Blushing furiously, the young policeman cupped a perspiring paw under the girl's grateful thighs, put another around her ribs lightly, and lifted her heavenwards. One of her slippers fell off. "It's okay," she said quickly. "I can put my foot into your pocket. There, then we'll carry my slipper." "Say, you sure don't weigh much," said Mac. "Now hold me tight," she said. "Hold me tight, and give me that flashlight. It's hurting me." The little procession made its way downstairs. The place was still and dark. Krug walked in front, with a circle of light playing upon his bent bare head and brown dressing gown, looking for all the world like a participant in some mysterious religious ceremony painted by a master of chiaroscuro, or copied from such a painting, or recopied from that or some other copy. Linda followed, her pistol pointing at its back, her prettily arched feet daintily negotiating the steps. Then came Mac carrying Mariette. Exaggerated parts of the banisters and sometimes the shadow of Linda's hair and cap slipped across Krug's back and along the ghostly wall, as the electric torch fingered by sly Mariette moved spasmodically. Her very thin wrist had a funny little bony knob on the outside. Now let us figure it out. Let us look at it squarely. They have found the handle. On the night of the 21st, Adam Krug was arrested. This was unexpected, since he had not thought they would find the handle. In fact, he had hardly known there was any handle at all. Let us proceed logically. They will not harm the child. On the contrary, it is their most valued asset. Let's not imagine things. Let us stick to pure reason. Oh, Mac, this is divine. I wish there were a billion steps. He may go to sleep. Let us pray he does. Olga once said that a billion was a million with a bad cold. Shin hurts. Anything. Your boots, Dragoschini, have a taste of candied plums, and look, my lips bleed from your spurs. I can't see a thing, said Linda. Quit fooling with that flashlight, Mary Chen. Hold it straight, kiddo, grumbled Mac, breathing somewhat heavily, this great raw pall steadily melting despite the lightness of his auburn burden because of her burning rose. Keep telling yourself that whatever they do, they will not hurt him. Their horrible stink and bitten nails, the smell and dirt of high school boys, they may start breaking his playthings, toss to each other, toss and catch, handy-dandy one of his pet marbles, the opal wand, unique, sacred, which even I dared not touch, he in the middle trying to stop them, trying to catch it, trying to save it from them, or, for instance, twisting his arm, or some filthy adolescent joke, or no, this is all wrong, hold on, I must not imagine things. They will let him sleep, they will merely ransack the flat and have a good meal in the kitchen, and as soon as I reach Sham or the Toad himself, I'd say what I shall say. A blustering wind took charge of our four friends as they came out of the house. An elegant car was waiting for them. At the wheel sat Linda's fiancé, a handsome blonde man with white eyelashes, and, "Oh, but we do know each other. Yes, indeed. As a matter of fact, I've had the honor of being Professor's chauffeur once before, and so this is the little sister. Glad to meet you, Mary Chen." "Get in, you fat numbskull," said Mac, and Krug heavily settled down next to the driver. "Here's your slipper, and here's your fur," said Linda, as she handed the pointed promised coat to Mac, who took it and started to help Mariette into it. "No, just round my shoulders," said the debutante. She shook her smooth brown hair, and then with a special disengaging gesture, the back of her hand rapidly passing along the nape of her delicate neck, she lightly swished it up so that it would not catch under the collar of the coat. "There is room for three," she sang out sweetly in her best golden oriole manner for the depths of the car, and sidling up to her sister, patted the free space on the outer side. But Mac unfolded one of the front seats so as to be right behind his prisoner. Resting both elbows on the partition and chewing the mint-flavored cud, he told Krug to behave. "All aboard?" queried Dr. Alexander. At this moment the nursery window, last one on the left, fourth floor, flew open, and one of the youths leant out, hauling something in a questioning tone. Because of the gusty wind, nothing could be made out of the jumble of words that came forth. "What?" cried Linda, her nose impatiently puckered. "Uglo-wo-glu-woo," called the youth from the window. "Okay," said Mac, to no one in particular. "Okay," he grumbled, "we hear you." "Okay," cried Linda upwards, making a megaphone of her hands. The second youth loomed in violent motion within the trapezoid of light. He was cuffing David, who had climbed upon a table in a futile attempt to reach the window. The bright-haired, pale-blue little figure disappeared. Krug, bellowing and plunging, was half out of the car, with Mac hanging on to him, tackling him round the waist. The car was moving. The struggle was useless. A procession of small colored animals raced along an oblique strip of wallpaper. Krug sank back in his seat. "I wonder what he was asking," remarked Linda. "Are you quite sure it is all right, Mac? I mean, well, they have their instructions, haven't they?" "I guess so. All 6 of you," said Krug, gasping. "All 6 will be tortured and shot if my child gets hurt." No, these are ugly words," said Mac, and none too gently rapped him with the loose joints of 4 fingers behind the ear. It was Dr. Alexander who relieved the somewhat strained situation, for there is no doubt that, for a moment, everybody felt something had gone wrong. "Well," he said with a sophisticated semi-smile, "ugly rumors and plain facts are not always as true as ugly brides and plain wives invariably are." Max sputtered with laughter right into Krug's neck. "I must say your new study has a regular sense of humor," whispered Mariette to her sister. "He is a college man," said big-eyed Linda, nodding in awe and protruding her lower lip. "He knows simply everything. It gives me the creeps. You should see him with a fuse or a monkey wrench." The 2 girls settled down to some cozy chatting as girls in back seats are prone to do. "Tell me some more about Gustav," asked Mariette. "How was he strangled?" "Well, it was like this. They came by the back door while I was making breakfast, and they said they had instructions to get rid of him. I said, but I don't want any mess on the floor, and I don't want any shooting." He had bolted into a clothes closet, You could hear him shivering there and clothes falling down upon him and hangers jingling in every shiver. It was just too gruesome. I said, I don't want to see you guys doing it, and I don't want to spend all day cleaning up, so they took him to the bathroom and started to work on him there. Of course, my morning was ruined. I had to be at my dentist at 10. And there they were in the bathroom, making simply hideous noises, especially Gustav. They must have been at it for at least 20 minutes. He had an Adam's apple as hard as a heel, they said, and of course I was late. As usual, commented Dr. Alexander. The girls laughed. Mac turned to the younger of the two and stopped chewing to ask, Sure you're not cold, son? His baritone voice was loaded with love. The teenager blushed and furtively pressed his hand. She said she was warm. Oh, very warm. Feel for yourself. She blushed because he had employed a secret diminutive which none knew, which he had somehow divined. Intuition in the sesame of love. All right, Carmel Eye, said the sly young giant, disengaging his hand. Remember, I'm on duty. And Krug felt again the man's drugstore breath. Chapter 17. The car came to a stop at the north gate of the prison. Dr. Alexander, mellowly manipulating the plump rubber of the horn, right hand, white lower, piriform breast of the black concubine, honked. A slow iron yawn was induced, and the car crawled into yard number 1. Their swarm of guards, some wearing gas masks which in profile bore a striking resemblance to greatly magnified ant heads, clambered upon the footboards and other accessible parts of the car. 2 or 3 even grunted their way up to the roof. Numerous heads, several of which were heavily gloved, tugged at the torpid, recurved Krug, still in the larval stage, and pulled him out. Guards A and B took charge of him. The rest zigzagged away, darting this way and that in search of new victims. With a smile and semi-salute, Dr. Alexander said to Guard A, I'll be seeing you, then backed and proceeded to energetically unravel the wheel. Unraveled, the car turned, jerked forward. Dr. Alexander repeated his semi-salute, while Mac, after wagging a great big forefinger at Krug, squeezed his haunches into the place Mariette had made for him next to herself. Presently the car was heard uttering festive honks as it sped away down to the private, musk-scented apartment. Oh, joyous, red-hot, impatient youth! Krug was led through several yards to the main building. In yards number 3 and 4, outlines of condemned men for target practice had been chalked on a brick wall. An old Russian legend says that the first thing a Rastrelyani, person executed by the firing squad, sees upon entering the other world, no interruption, please, this is premature, take your hands away, is not a gathering of ordinary shades or spirits or repulsive, unutterably repulsive, dear ones, in antiquated clothes, as you might think, but a kind of silent, slow ballet, a welcoming group of these chalked outlines, moving wavily like transparent infusoria. But away with those bleak superstitions. They entered the building, and Krug found himself in a curiously empty room. It was perfectly round, with a well-scrubbed cement floor. So suddenly did his guards disappear that, had he been in character in fiction, he might well have wondered whether the strange doings and so on had not been some evil vision, and so forth. He had a throbbing headache, one of those headaches that seem to transcend on one side of the limits of one's head, like the colors in cheap comets, and do not quite fill the head space on the other, and the dull throbs were saying 1, 1, 1, never reaching 2, never. Of the 4 doors at the cardinal points of the circular room, only 1, 1, 1 was unlocked. Krug pushed it open. Yes, said a pale-faced man, still looking down at the seesaw blotter with which he was dabbing whatever he had just written. I demand immediate action, said Krug. The official looked at him with tired, watery eyes. My name is Concordi Philadelphovich Kolokolichikov, he said, but they call me Cole. Take a seat. I began Krug anew. Cole, shaking his head, hurriedly selected the necessary forms. Wait a minute. First of all, we must have the answers. Your name is Adam Krug. Will you please have my child brought here at once? At once. A little patience, said Cole, dipping his pen. I admit the procedure is tiresome, but the sooner we get it over with, the better. All right. Krug. Age? Will this nonsense be necessary if I tell you straight away that I have changed my mind? It is necessary under all circumstances. Sex, male. Eyebrows shaggy. Father's name, same as mine, curse you. Now don't curse me. I am as tired as you are. Religion, none. None is no answer. The law requires every male to declare his religious affiliation. Catholic, Vitalist, Protestant, there is no answer. My dear sir, you have been baptized, at least. I do not know what you are talking about. Well, this is most. Look here. I must put down something. How many questions more have you got to fill out this? pointing with a madly trembling finger at the page. I am afraid so. In that case, I refuse to continue. Here I am with declaration of the utmost importance to make, and you take up my time with nonsense. Nonsense is a harsh word. Look here, I will sign anything of my son. One child? One. A boy of 8. A tender age. Pretty hard upon you, sir, I admit. I mean, I am a father myself and all that. However, I can assure you that your boy is perfectly safe. He is not, cried Krug. You delegated 2 ruffians. I did not delegate anybody. You are in the presence of an underpaid chinovnik. As a matter of fact, I deplore everything that has happened in Russian literature. Anyway, whoever is responsible must choose. Either I remain silent forever, or else I speak again, I sign, swear, anything the government wants. But I will do this, and more, only if my child is brought here to this room at once. Call pondered. The whole thing is very irregular, he said at length. But I guess you are right. You see, the general procedure is something like this. First, the questionnaire must be filled. Then you go to your cell. There you have a heart-to-heart talk with a fellow prisoner who really is one of our agents. Then around 2 in the morning you are roused from a fitful sleep, and I start to question you again. It was thought by competent people that you would break down between 6:40 and 7:15. Our meteorologist predicted a particularly cheerless dawn. Dr. Alexander, a colleague of yours, agreed to translate into everyday language your cryptic utterances, for no one can have predicted this bluntness, I suppose I may also add that a child's voice would have been relayed to you, emitting moans of artificial pain. I had been rehearsing it with my own little children. They will be bitterly disappointed. Do you really mean to say that you are ready to pledge allegiance to the state and all that? If you had better hurry, the nightmare may get out of control. Why, of course, I shall have things fixed immediately. Your attitude is most satisfactory. Our great prison has made a man of you. It is a real treat. I shall be congratulated for having broken you so quickly. Excuse me. He got up, a small, slender state employee with a large, pale head and black, serrated jaws, plucked aside the folds of the velvet portiere, and then the captive remained alone with his dull one-on-one. A filing cabinet concealed the entrance Krug had used some minutes before. What looked like a curtained window turned out to be a curtained mirror. He arranged the collar of his dressing gown. 4 years elapsed, then disjointed parts of a century, odds and ends of torn time, say 22 years in all. The oak tree before the old church had lost its birds alone. Gnarled Krug had not changed. Preceded by a slight hunching or bunching or both of the curtain, and then by his own visible hand, Concordi Philadelphich returned. He looked pleased. Your boy will be brought here in a jiffy, he said brightly. Everybody is much relieved. Been in the care of the trained nurse. She says the kid behaved pretty badly. A problem child, I suppose? By the way, I am asked to ask you, would you like to write down your own speech and submit it in advance, or will you use the material prepared? The material. I am terribly thirsty. We shall have some refreshments presently. Now there is another question. Here are some papers to be signed. We could start right now. Not before I see my child. You are going to be a very messy man, Sudar, sir. I warn you. There is sure to be a journalist or two hanging around already. Oh, the worries we have gone through. We thought the university would never open again. I suppose tomorrow there will be a student demonstrations, processions, public Thanksgiving. Do you know the Abrikosov, the film producer? Well, he said he had known all along that you would suddenly realize the greatness of the state and all that. He said it was like La Grace in religion, a revelation. He said it was very difficult to explain things to anybody who had not experienced this sudden dazzling shock of truth. Personally, I am very happy to have had the privilege of witnessing your beautiful conversion. Still sulking? Come, let's erase those wrinkles. Hark! Music! He had apparently pressed a button and turned a knob, for some trumpety sounds issued from somewhere, and the good fellow added in a reverent whisper, music in your honor. The band was drowned, however, by a shrill telephone peal. Capital news, evidently, for Culver placed the receiver with a triumphant flourish and motion for Krug towards the curtained door. After you. He was a man of the world. Krug was not, and pressed forward like a boorish boar. A numbered scene belonging to one of the last acts anyway, the spacious waiting room of a fashionable prison. Cute little model of guillotine, with stiff top-hatted doll in attendance. Under glass bell on mantelpiece, oil pictures dealing darkly with various religious subjects, a collection of magazines on a low table, the geographical magazine Stolica I Usadba Divoch de Tavler, L'Illustration, 1 or 2 bookcases with the usual books, Little Women, Volume 3, of the History of Nottingham, and so on. a bunch of keys on the chair mislaid there by one of the wardens, a table with refreshments, a plate of herring sandwiches, and a pail of water surrounded with several mugs coming from various German Kurats. Krug's mug had a bad view of Bad Kissingen. A door at the back swung open. Several press photographers and reporters formed a live gallery for the passage of two burly men, leading in a thin, frightened boy of 12 or 13. His head was newly bandaged. Nobody was to blame, they said. He had slipped on a highly polished floor and hit his forehead against the model of Stevenson's engine in the Children's Museum. He wore a schoolboy's black uniform with belt. His elbow flew up to shield his face as one of the men made a sudden gesture meant to curb the eagerness of the press people. "That is not my child," said Krug. "Your dad is always joking, said Cole to the boy kindly. "I want my own child. This is somebody else's child." "What's that?" asked Cole sharply. "Not your child? Nonsense, man. Use your eyes." One of the burly men, a policeman in plain clothes, produced a document which he handed to Cole. The document said clearly, "Arvid Krug, son of Professor Martin Krug, former vice president of the Academy of Medicine." "The bandage perhaps changes him a little," said Cole hastily, a note of desperation creeping into his patter. "And then, of course, little boys grow so fast." The guards were knocking down the apparatus of the photographers and pushing the reporters out of the room. "Hold the boy," said a brutal voice. The newcomer, a person called Christelsen, red-faced, blue eyes, tall, starched color, who was, as it soon transpired, second secretary of the Council of Elders, came up close to Cole and asked poor Cole, while holding him by the knot of his necktie, whether Cole did not think he was sort of responsible for this idiotic misunderstanding. Cole was still hoping against hope. "Are you quite sure," he kept asking Krug, "are you quite sure this little fellow is not your son? Philosophers are absent-minded, you know. The light in this room is not very grand." Krug closed his eyes and said through clenched teeth, "I want my own child." Cole turned to Christelsen, spread out his hands, and produced a helpless, hopeless, bursting sound with his lips. Poot. Meanwhile, the unwanted boy was led away. "We apologize," said Cole to Krug. "Such mistakes are bound to occur when there are so many arrests." "Or not enough," interrupted Christelsen crisply. "He means," said Cole to Krug, "that those who made this mistake will be dearly punished. Christelsen, Memiju, or pay for it severely." "Exactly. Of course matters will be straightened out without delay. There are 400 telephones in this building. Your little lost child will be found at once. I understand now why my wife had that terrible dream last night. Ah, Christelsen, was war a Traum. What a dream." The two officials, the smaller one talking volubly and pawing at his tie, the other maintaining a grim silence, his polar sea eyes looking straight ahead, left the room. Krug waited again. At 11:24 p.m., a policeman, now in uniform, stole in, looking for Christelsen. He wanted to know what was to be done with the wrong boy. He spoke in a hoarse whisper. When told by Krug that they had gone that way, he pointed to the door, delicately, interrogatively, then tiptoed across the room, his Adam's apple moving differently. Was centuries long and closing, quite noiselessly, the door. At 11:43, the same man, now wild-eyed and disheveled, was led back through the waiting room by two special guards, to be shot later as a minor scapegoat, together with the other burly men. Vide, outnumbered, seen, and poor Concordi. At 12 punctually, Krug was still waiting. Little by little, however, various sounds coming from the neighboring offices increased in volume and agitation. Several times clerks across the room at a breathless run, and once a telephone operator, a Miss Lovedale, who had been disgracefully manhandled, was carried to the prison hospital on a stretcher by two kind-hearted, stone-faced colleagues. At 1:08 a.m., rumors of Krug's arrest reached the little group of anti-equalist conspirators, of which Student Focus was the leader. At 2:17, a bearded man who said he was an electro-technician came to inspect the heat radiator, but was told by a suspicious warden that no electricity was involved in the heating system, and would he please come another day. The windows turned a ghostly blue when Christelsen at last reappeared. He was glad to inform Krug that the child had been located. "You will be reunited in a few minutes," he said, adding the new torture room, completely modernized, was right at the moment being prepared to receive those who had blundered. He wanted to know whether he had been correctly informed regarding Adam Krug's sudden conversion. Krug answered yes. He was ready to broadcast to some of the richer foreign states his firm conviction that equalism was all right, if, and only if, his child were returned to him safe and sound. Christelsen led him to a police car, and on the way started to explain things. It was quite clear that something had gone dreadfully wrong. The child had been taken to a kind of, institute for abnormal children, instead of the best state rest house, as had been arranged. You are hurting my wrist, sir." Unfortunately, the director of the institute had understood, as who had not, that the child delivered to him was one of the so-called orphans, now and then used to serve as release instrument for the benefit of the most interesting inmates with a so-called criminal record, rape, murder, wanton destruction of state property, etc. The theory, and we are not here to discuss its worth, and you shall pay for my cough if you tear, was that if once a week the really difficult patients would enjoy the possibility of venting in full their repressed yearnings, the exaggerated urge to hunt, to hurt, destroy, etc. upon some little human creature of no value to the community, then by degrees the evil in them would be allowed to escape, would be, so to say, effunded, and eventually they would become good citizens. The experiment might be criticized, of course, but that was not the point. Christelsen carefully wiped the blood from his mouth and offered his none too clean handkerchief to Krug. To wipe Krug's knuckles, Krug refused. They entered the car. Several soldiers joined them. While the enclosure where the release games took place was so situated that the director from his window and the other doctors, research workers, male and female, Dr. Amalia von Whitfield, for instance, one of the most fascinating personalities you have ever met, an aristocrat, you would enjoy meeting her under happier circumstances, sure you would. From other gemothic points of vantage, could watch the proceedings and take notes. A nurse led the orphan down the marble steps. The enclosure was a beautiful expanse of turf, and the whole place, especially in summer, looked extremely attractive, reminding one of those open-air theaters that were so dear to the Greeks. The orphan, or little person, was left alone and allowed to roam all over the enclosure. One of the photographs showed him lying disconsolately on his stomach and uprooting a bit of turf with his listless fingers. The nurse reappeared on the garden steps and clapped her hands to make him stop. He stopped. After a while, the patients, or inmates, 8 all told, were let into the enclosure. At first they kept at a distance, eyeing the little person. It was interesting to observe how the gang spirit gradually asserted itself. They had been rough, lawless, unorganized individuals, but now something was binding them. The community spirit, positive, was conquering the individual winds, negative. For the first time in their lives they were organized. Dr. von Wittwil used to say that this was a wonderful moment. One felt that, as she quaintly put it, something was really happening, or in technical language, the ego, he goes, oof, out, and the pure egg, common extract of egos, remains. And then the fun began. One of the patients, a representative or potential leader, a heavy, handsome boy of 17, went up to the little person and sat down beside him on the turf and said, "Open your mouth." The little person did what he was told, and with an unerring precision the youth spat a pebble into a child's open mouth. This was a wee bit against the rules, because generally speaking, all missiles, instruments, arms, and so forth were forbidden. Sometimes the squeezing game started at once after the spitting game, but in other cases the development from harmless pinching and poking or mild sexual investigations to limb tearing, bone breaking, deoculation, etc. took a considerable time. Deaths were of course unavoidable, but quite often the little person was afterwards patched up and gamely made to return to the fray. "Next Sunday, dear, you will play with the big boys again." A patched up little person provided an especially satisfactory release. Now we take all this, press it into a small to a small ball, and fit it into the center of Krug's brain, where it gently expands. The drive was a long one. Somewhere, in a rough mountain region, 4,000 or 5,000 feet above sea level, they stopped. The soldiers wanted their Frühstück, early luncheon, and were not loath to make a quiet picnic of it in that wild, picturesque place. The car stood inert, very slightly leaning on one side among dark rocks and patches of dead white snow. They took out their bread and cucumbers and regimental thermos bottles, and moodily munched as they sat hunched up on the footboard, or on the withered, tousled, coarse grass beside the highway. The Royal George, one of the nature's wonders, cut by sand-laden waters of the turbulent Sakra River through eons of time, offered scenes of splendor and glory. We tried very hard at Bridal Veil Ranch to understand and appreciate the attitude of mind in which many of our guests arrived from their city homes and businesses, and this is the reason we endeavor to have our guests do just exactly as they wish in the way of fun, exercise, and rest. Krug was allowed to get out of the car for a minute. Christelsen, who had no eye for beauty, remained inside eating an apple and skimming through a long private letter he had received the day before and had not had time to peruse. Even those men of steel have their domestic troubles. Krug stood with his back to the soldiers in front of the rock. This went on for such a long time that at last one of the soldiers remarked with a laugh, "Pori Galonushka Dve Visvil Zanok. I fancy you must have drunk a couple of gallons during the night." Here she had her accident. Krug came back and slowly, painfully penetrated into the car where he joined Christelsen, who was still reading. "Good morning," mumbled the latter, withdrawing his book. Presently he lifted his head, hastily crammed the letter into his pocket, and he called out to the soldiers. Highway 76 brought them down into another part of the plain, and very soon they saw the smoking chimneys of the little factory town in the neighborhood of which the famous experimental station was situated. Its director was a Dr. Hemmock, short, sturdy, with a bushy yellowish-white mustache, protruding eyes, and stumpy legs. He, his assistants, and his nurses were in a state of excitement bordering on ordinary panic. Christelsen said he did not know yet whether they were to be destroyed or not. He expected, he said, to get destructions, a spoonerism for instructions. By telephone, he looked at his watch soon. They were all horribly obsequious, toadying to Krug, offering him a shower bath, the assistance of a pretty masseuse, a mouth organ requisitioned from an inmate, a glass of beer, brandy, breakfast, a morning paper, a shave, a game of cards, a suit of clothes, anything. They were obviously playing for time. Finally, Krug was ushered into a projection hall. He was told that he would be led to his child in a minute. The child was still asleep, they said, and in the meantime would he not like to see a movie picture taken but a few hours ago? It showed, they said, how healthy and happy the child was. He sat down. He accepted the flask of brandy, which one of the shivering, smiling nurses was thrusting into his face. So scared was she that she first attempted to feed him as she would an infant. Dr. Hamek, his false teeth rattling in his head like dice, gave the order to start the performance. A young Chinese brought David's fur-trimmed little overcoat. Yes, I recognize it is his. And turned it this way and that, newly cleaned, no more holes, see. With the flickering gestures of a conjurer to show that there was no deceit, the child had been really found. Finally, with a twittering cry, he turned out one of those pockets. A little toy car, yes, we brought it together, and a child's silver ring with most of the enamel gone, yes. Then he bowed and retired. Christelsen, who sat next to Krug in the first row, looked gloomily and suspicious. His arms were crossed. A trick, a darned trick, he kept muttering. The lights went out, and a square shimmer of light jumped onto the screen, but the whir of the machine was again broken off, the engineer being affected by the general nervousness. In the dark, Dr. Hamek leant towards Krug and spoke in a thick stream of apprehensiveness and halitosis. "We are happy to have you with us. We hope you will enjoy the picture. In the interest of silence, put in a good word. We did our best." The whirring noise was resumed, and an inscription appeared upside down. Again the engine stopped. A nurse giggled. "Science, please," said the doctor. Christelsen, who had had enough of it, quickly left his place. The unfortunate Hamek tried to restrain him, but was shaken off by a gruff official. A trembling legend appeared on the screen. "Test 656. This melted into a subtle subtitle. A night lawn party. Armed nurses were shown unlocking doors. Blinking, the inmates trooped out. Frau Dr. von Vittel, leader of the experiment, no whistling please, said the next inscription. In spite of the dreadful predicament he was in, even Dr. Hamek could not restrain an apprehensive ha-ha. The woman, Vittel, a statuesque blonde holding a whip in one hand and a chronometer on the other, swept haughtily across the screen. "Watch those curves." A curving line on the blackboard was shown, and a pointer in a rub-gloved hand pointed out the climatic points and other points of interest in the Eurovization of the ego. The patients are grouped at as the rosebush entrance of the enclosure. They are searched for concealed weapons. One of the doctors drew out of the sleeve of the fattest boy a lumberman's saw. "Bad luck, Fatso." A collection of labeled implements was shown on a tray. The aforeseen saw, a piece of lead pipe, a mouth organ, a bit of rope, one of those penknives, and 24 blades and things, a pea-shooter, a six-shooter, awls, augers, gramophone needles, an old-fashioned battle axe. Lying in wait, they lay in wait. The little person appears. Down the floodlit marble steps leading into the garden he came. A nurse in white accompanied him, then stopped and bade him descend alone. David had his warmest overcoat on, but his legs were bare and he wore his bedroom slippers. The whole thing lasted a moment. He turned his face out to the nurse, his eyelashes beat, his hair caught a gleam of lambent light, then he looked around, met Krug's eyes, showed no sign of recognition, and uncertainty went down the few steps that remained. His face became larger, dimmer, and vanished as it met mine. The nurse remained on the steps, a faint, not untender smile playing on her dark lips. "What a treat," said the legend, "for a little person to be out walking in the middle of the night, and then, what is that?" Loudly, Dr. Hamek coughed, and the whir of the machine stopped. The light went on again. "I want to wake up. Where is he? I shall die if I do not wake up." He declined the refreshments, refused to sign the distinguished visitor's book, walked through the people barring his way as if they were cobwebs. Dr. Hamek, rolling his eyes, panting, pressing his hand to his diseased heart, motioned to the head nurse to lead Krug to the infirmary. There is little to add. In the passage, Christelsen, with a big cigar in his mouth, was engaged in jotting down the whole story in a little book which he pressed to the yellow wall on the level of his forehead. He jerked his thumb towards the door A1. Krug entered. Frau Dr. von Wichtel Nabokov, the third eldest sister, was gently, almost dreamily, shaking a thermometer as she looked down at the bed near which she stood in the far corner of the room. Then she turned to Krug and advanced toward him. "Brace yourself," she said quietly. "There has been an accident. We have done our best." Krug pushed her aside with such force that she crashed into a white weighing machine and broke the thermometer she was holding. "Oops," she said. The murdered child had a crimson and gold turban around its head.